Hello, and welcome to Broadcasting Scotland. It's Wednesday, the 6th of April. I'm Andrew Wilson, and this is Scotland at 7. This evening, I have the latest daily updates from Ukraine on day 42 of the illegal Russian invasion. Then I'll introduce our guest for this evening, and then together we will take a look at today's headlines from Scotland and around the world. The governor of the self-proclaimed Republic of Donetsk said at least 2 civilians were killed and 5 wounded on Wednesday when Russian artillery fire struck a humanitarian aid distribution point in the town of Vuhledar. The governor of Russia's Kursk region has claimed that border guards were fired on from Ukraine on Tuesday. Ukraine's military claimed to have no knowledge of the alleged incident. Ukraine's Deputy Prime Minister Irina Vereshchuk has said that a total of 11 humanitarian corridors have been agreed for Wednesday. The Luhansk governor, Serhiy Gaidai, told civilians to evacuate while it is safe. Russian soldiers have committed sexual violence against Ukrainian women and men, including elderly people and children, Ukraine's Prosecutor General Irina Venediktova has alleged. Pope Francis has condemned what he called the massacre of Bucha and held up a Ukrainian flag sent from the town at his weekly audience in the Vatican's auditorium. He described the war in Ukraine as cruelty that is increasingly horrendous. The US and its allies are preparing to impose new sanctions on Moscow over civilian killings in Ukraine, as the West makes a fresh attempt to cripple Vladimir Putin's regime, economy, and war effort. Ukraine's Minister for Foreign Affairs, Dmytro Kuleba, has commented on the latest tranche of EU sanctions against Russia, saying that he appreciates the strengthening of the package. However, he called on his European neighbours to go further, saying that difficult times require difficult decisions. Putin's ally, Dmitry Medvedev, has said that Russia will use lawsuits to fight Western attempts to expropriate Russian property overseas. Hungary's foreign ministry has summoned Ukraine's ambassador over what it called his offensive statements on Hungary's stance regarding the war. And the European Council President, Charles Michel, has said that EU countries should think about ways to offer asylum to Russian soldiers willing to desert the Ukrainian battlefields. Now, we are lucky enough this evening to be joined by a regular contributor, Chris McCusker. Chris is an activist, a campaigner, a carer, and a humanitarian aid worker. Chris, how are you keeping this evening?
I'm grand, Andrew, and nice to be joining the show this evening.
Well, it's grand that you're able to join us this evening. Thanks for joining us on Broadcasting Scotland tonight. Now, our first story this evening is that the US has announced a new round of sanctions targeting Russia's top public and private banks and 2 daughters of Vladimir Putin, following mounting global accusations of Russian war crimes in Ukraine. The sanctions targeted Maria Vorontsova and Katerina Tikhonova, 2 adult daughters of Putin's, with his former wife, Ludmila Shrekbeneva. Also hit with new sanctions were the wife and daughter of the Russian Foreign Minister, Sergei Lavrov, and members of Russia's Security Council, including the former President and Prime Minister Dmitry Medvedev and the current Prime Minister, Mikhail Mishustin. These individuals have enriched themselves at the expense of the Russian people. Some of them have been responsible for providing the support necessary to underpin Putin's war on Ukraine, the White House said. We believe that many of Putin's assets are hidden with family members, and that's why we're targeting them, a senior US official told reporters, referring to these 2 daughters. The White House also declared full blocking sanctions on Russia's largest public and private financial institutions, Sberbank and Alfa Bank, and said all new US investment in Russia was now prohibited. New sanctions would be announced on Thursday on key Russian state enterprises, it said, aiming to hamper their ability to trade and move money through the global financial systems. Joe Biden linked the new US sanctions directly to Bucha, tweeting that he had made it clear that Russia would pay a severe and immediate price for its atrocities there. The UK separately said it would impose a full asset freeze on Russia's largest bank and end all imports of oil and coal by the end of this year. Sanctions will also be imposed on 8 more oligarchs, including Moshe Kantor, the largest shareholder of the fertilizer company Akron, and Andrei Guriev, the founder of another key fertilizer company, whom the UK describes as a close associate of Vladimir Putin. Now, Chris, what about Putin's reported current partner, the former rhythmic gymnast Alina Kababeva, who's now a Russian media and sports magnate? At the beginning of March, she was reported by the London Times and the New York Post to be living in a villa in Switzerland, along with a variously number reported of other children. Presumably among them were reported to be the child she gave birth to in Lugano in 2015, and somewhat younger 2 boys with whom she had previously been photographed, all of whom are reported to also have been fathered by Putin. So why do you think the US are focusing on one part of Putin's family and not the others?
Call me cynical, but I think it's sort of like slowly catch a monkey. They don't want to go too hard, too fast, too soon. So it seems that it looks like that they're going after the members of the family that are now on the periphery, and I mean, it's rather startling that you cite the fact that the former wife and former, or should I say, I mean, obviously current children, but I can see a harsh, stark reality between Putin and a certain gentleman that resides in Number 10. So there's a wee bit of similarity there, but we'll leave that to one side. I stick by my original thoughts on this, where they don't want to be seen to be going in sort of like gung ho, if you like. So it's still tinkering around the edges. I think President Zelensky will look at it that way. And in fact, in a couple of articles, several senior Ukrainian ministers have called for tougher sanctions, ones that will actually hurt the Russian regime. So I think the Europe and the West are going how we would say in the west of Scotland, cacanny at the moment,
Well, that's a good point, Chris. You say and you were saying that perhaps some of these sanctions are tinkering, and also you were implying that the various countries applying sanctions are in a way kind of boiling the frog. They're raising the temperature progressively. They're not turning the gas right up at the beginning. In the context of Putin's behaviour, do you think that approach is likely to be successful and is going to save lives, or is an alternative is a bigger and blunter range of economic weapons being deployed quickly? Is that what's really needed to start saving lives?
Well, I mean, I don't think that the sanctions will be sufficient in order to do any long-term lasting damage financially for Putin. I think he's got way too many fingers in the pies. But it's interesting that you said that Britain are, dumbing down on the export of coal and oil and stuff like that. But what stands out for me is the fact that the UK have not said anything about gas. And that's where, if I think if you target what is really going to cause financial hardship for Putin, I think that Russia does a tremendous amount of export and gas as well, and quite a lot of countries are not heavily reliant on it, but nonetheless are still reliant on it. And I think that might be, what you could call stage 2 or stage 3, because as as I say, you're reading between the lines. I think at the moment they're just tinkering around the edges, and it is going to come down. Sadly, I think one of these weeks we are going to report, which again I'm only speculating, but I think it's a natural progression of things as that the UN are going to get. They're going to have to get involved, manually. There is only so many sanctions that you can apply,
Of
and
course.
and again with Putin threatening legal action and stuff like that, you just don't know where that is going to end up.
Well, that's a good point, Chris. And you mentioned gas, and that's actually the subject of our next item, because the EU has given 35 billion euros to Vladimir Putin for energy supplies since the start of the war, and only 1 billion euros to fund Ukraine's defence, the EU's top diplomat has said. Josep Borrell, the EU's foreign policy chief, made the comparison in a characteristically blunt speech to the European Parliament as he urged Europe to send more arms to Ukraine to help end the war. We have to continue arming Ukraine, he said. We need less rounds of applause and more assistance, he said. The EU has pledged 1 billion euros in military aid for Ukraine, he said, which might seem a lot, but 1 billion euros is what we pay to Putin every day for the energy he provides us. Since the beginning of the war, we have given him 35 billion euros. Compare that to the 1 billion euros we have given to Ukraine in arms and weapons. He made these comments as the EU debated a fifth round of sanctions against Russia, with a ban on coal imports worth 4 billion euros from the country expected to be announced soon. Poland and the Baltic states argued that the energy ban should also target Russia's far more lucrative oil and gas exports, but they have faced resistance to immediate action from Germany, Austria, and Hungary. The EU overall imports 41% of its gas and 27% of its oil from Russia, but these figures are much higher in some member states. The European Commission President, Ursula von der Leyen, who is expected to travel to Kyiv with Borrell in the coming days, promised the latest sanctions would not be the last. Now we will have to look into oil, and we will have to look into the revenues that Russia gets from fossil fuels, she said. EU officials, she told MEPs, would study an Estonian idea under which payments for Russian gas would be put into an escrow account, that is in the hands of a third party, with the aim of limiting revenues to the Russian state that could fund the war effort. Europe's energy autonomy hinged on renewable energy, Borrell said, as he lamented the fact that the EU had become dependent on fossil fuels from repressive regimes around its borders. So, Chris, to me, whilst it's a characteristically blunt speech from Josep Borrell, I also thought that he was starting to sound a wee bit like President Zelensky. Now, if that's the case, is it because they both now share a view of the critical seriousness of the situation for ordinary Ukrainian citizens who are fighting for their homes and their lives now, or is there something else behind the change in Josep Borrell's tone?
No, I don't think it is actually. I think he has bravely put his head above the parapet, where an awful lot of people are not actually talking about the nuts and bolts of it. And when he highlights eloquently how much Europe is actually paying Russia, for its exports as compared to what they're divvying up Ukraine to actually fight Russia. I mean, it's hard to argue with those hard, cold facts. I mean, 1 billion against 37 billion. You need to weigh it up. From that score. I mean, obviously they can buy more weapons. They can buy more sophisticated long-range guns, and I mean, again, Russia is quite a clever state, and insofar as it doesn't have to go cap in hand to any other country in order to buy ammunition and munitions and stuff like that. Largely 90% of it is manufactured in Russia. So, I think it is time to look at the nuts and bolts of it, as I say, and again, as I alluded to in the first topic, is have a look at where else that you could try and possibly puncture Putin's tires, with regards Russia's economy.
Absolutely. Thanks, Chris. Now, there's a story that was breaking just before we came on air this afternoon. David Smith, who's 57, a security guard at the British Embassy in Berlin, who is suspected of spying for Russia, has been extradited from Germany and will appear in court on Thursday, charged with 9 offences under the Official Secrets Act, Scotland Yard has said. Now, Chris, this individual was arrested back in August last year. Why do you think it's taken so long, 6 months or so, to extradite him back to the UK from Berlin?
Right. Well, luckily I just caught this snippet earlier on, and I had a wee read at it, and I think it's indicative of the way that the likes of Interpol and the security services and the EU work. They because we're out of the EU, they no longer have to work sort of like jig time. So I think they had been sitting on this, and because of the increasing unrest, shall we say, that Russia is causing, they could possibly see him as being, part of some sort of broker deal or something like that. So I think it's been sped up, somewhat, and he's been sent over to the UK to suite. And if they're going to make an example of this guy, then if that's their tactics, then fair play. But we have to remember what the Russia is capable of with regards to the scenario that played out in Salisbury with the Skripal poisoning. So I wouldn't put it past Putin to try and put the kibosh on this in some sort of way, shape, or form. But again, I think that somebody's sort of like put 2 and 2 together, and in collaboration with Germany, asked for it to be sped up and brought over. So I mean, this is obviously something that's going to play out at the end of the week, and we'll need to see how it goes.
Absolutely, Chris. I'm intrigued that your mind's clearly turning to Tom Hanks and Mark Rylance in the movie Bridge of Spies, but I'm pretty sure we'll come back to this as we look at how the press, in particular, perhaps the Evening Standard, owned by Evgeny Lebedev, how they report the trial of this individual who's accused of spying for Russia. But we'll move on to our next item, which is that new research shows that the behavioural change aspect of the UK government's two-child policy has dismally failed. Since its introduction exactly 5 years ago today, the fertility rate for third and subsequent children born to poorer families has barely fallen. Instead, the main impact of the policy has been to become the biggest single driver of child poverty. In the absence of a behavioural fertility response to the policy, the main function of the two-child limit is to deprive families living on a low income of approximately £3,000 a year. This will inevitably lead to dramatic increases in child poverty among larger families, said Professor Jonathan Portes, co-author of the study. Analysis of birth records and household survey data for the study, commissioned by the Nuffield Foundation, found the policy's introduction in 2017 led to a decline in births of third children of just 5,600 a year. That's fewer than 1% of the total annual births in England and Wales. The research comes as fresh estimates suggest that 1.4 million children in more than 400,000 families in the UK are affected by this two-child policy. April's below-inflation benefits rise means affected families with 3 children now face a £983 a month shortfall in benefits, with larger families facing an even bigger hole in their incomes. Over 50% of children and families with more than 2 children will be in poverty by 2027, according to the Child Poverty Action Group. Removing the policy would immediately lift 250,000 children out of poverty. Despite ministers' feckless claimants' rhetoric, official figures show that over half of these families affected are working. The two-child policy was the brainchild of the former Chancellor George Osborne, who announced in 2015, against a backdrop of right-wing media hysteria around large families, benefits broods they were called, claimed to be having children primarily to exploit what was alleged to be an over-generous welfare system. It immediately ran into problems after critics pointed out that women who gave birth to a third or subsequent child as a result of rape would be penalised under the policy. Exemptions were then introduced for this and for instances of multiple births or where families had adopted children or had kinship care arrangements. There is evidence the two-child policy has been a factor in women's decisions to have an abortion. Research has suggested it has also had a devastating impact on family life, even before the current Tory cost of living crisis, with households forced to cut back on food and heating. Last month, the Scottish Social Justice Secretary, Shona Robertson MSP, announced the Scottish Government would be taking immediate steps to mitigate the UK Government's benefit cap as fully as possible within devolved powers through the discretionary housing payments. So, Chris, we know that a number of cultures and religions favour families larger than 2. We also know that this cap is focused on the very poorest families. So why did George Osborne and why does the current Tory government continue to pick on such a relatively small sector of our society? Is it perhaps for the same reasons that HMRC spends many more times chasing alleged benefits fraudsters than it ever does pursuing wealthy tax dodgers?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I was going to try and sum it up, in 2 simple words, and that's just policy choice, and that's as clear cut as what it is. It's the choice of the Tories, the establishment of Britain, that in order to keep their steel toe caps on the throat of the working man or woman, they need to keep them down and not let them aspire to saving any wealth or trying to sort of like climb out of their pigeonhole class that they're put in. I think we can actually see through time, through the actual term of this Tory despotic regime, I think we could possibly see an erosion of the middle class. I think it's as severe as that, because it is, if you read the classic Steinbeck novel, Us and Them, it really does seem to create that kind of sort of like 2-tier sort of like standoff, where the elite have got everything and the poor have got nothing, and there is no middle ground, because the people in the middle ground are teetering on the edge of poverty whilst trying to aspire to getting on to the side of the elite. And once that actually happens in Britain, I think you will find, hopefully you will find a sea change, obviously, in voting intentions. I think certainly it's going to happen in Scotland, because I think it's something like 870 million is the figure quoted that is going to hit Scotland adversely, Scottish families, that is. which is going to be missing out of the collective sort of like country's purse. And you see it played out on a nearly a daily basis now. And it's not just families, but the communities are starting to get affected now. There's a closure of a big hotel in Glasgow, which has obviously got a knock-on effect, staff-wise. But when you don't have that facility available, and that is obviously down to energy costs, it's down to the fact that people don't have money in their pockets readily to go out and frivolously spend, then obviously they've taken a decision to close that establishment. Once those establishments start folding, for want of a better word, it's you can see that it's the wrong policy choice made by the Tories. Where people obviously of a left-sided view would say that you need more businesses and more liquidity, swirling around the communities in order to make people spend and stuff like that. So I just think it's a harsh and deliberate policy choice that the Tories have went for.
Thanks, Chris. You were talking there about Scottish families and Scottish communities. Now, let's look at that a little bit more with our next item, which is that people in Scotland are still receiving the fairest tax deal compared with the rest of the UK amidst the Tory national insurance hike. For 2022-23, Scottish median earners can expect to pay £18.79 less than median earners in England and Wales. And in total, median earners in Scotland will pay £2,661.41p in income tax, whilst those in England and Wales will pay £2,680.20. Also, whilst the average Band D council taxpayers in Scotland will pay £619 less than those in England and £430 less than the equivalent in Wales. The fairer tax system is just one measure by the Scottish Government to tackle the spiralling Tory cost of living crisis, which has been compounded by the Chancellor's hike in national insurance. Commenting, the SNP MSP Michelle Thompson said, "In Scotland, we are continuing to build a tax system that is not only fairer than in England and Wales, but is putting extra cash in the pockets of those on the lowest incomes in Scotland, whilst ensuring that those that can pay more do so. It is a tale of two governments as the Tories hike national insurance, a regressive tax that impacts those on the lowest incomes. Once again," she said, "the Tories are looking after their rich pals and donors, with this tax hike on those in the lowest incomes compounding the Tory cost of living crisis." Now, Chris, one way of putting it is that awful April is just the beginning of an incredibly tough few months. The real pain of the national insurance hike will be felt in everyone's on payday at the end of this month. And at that point, we'll already be reeling from the impact of higher energy bills, council tax, water bills, fuel costs, and we'll have to manage it all on a smaller pay packet. It's a terrible time for the Tory government in Westminster to be hiking taxes. So if it's an awful April for most of us, is that in contrast to Rishi Sunak, the Chancellor's April? It's widely reported that he'll spend his Easter holidays at one of his houses in Santa Monica in California.
Yeah, but he certainly won't feel it. And I've also got to point out as well, you add into the mix of the rising food prices as well. But I've certainly noticed that I've done a shop for my elder brother today, and basic commodities such as your basic pasta from Aldi's and Lidl's and stuff like that. There's a markup of 10-15 pence there right away. Where you could expect to buy a packet of pasta for say 40-45 pence. It's now jumping up to about 65 pence. So you add that into the mix, and I don't think the viewers will be surprised for me to say that whilst it's not exactly a socialist sort of outlook that the Scottish Government are taking, it's definitely kind of like a left radical approach to tax with the powers that we have got, I must add, because we do not have the powers to impose a wealth tax on the bigger companies like Amazon and stuff like that, the energy companies that operate in Scotland. So again, the Tories will spin this round, and they will still continue the narrative that Scotland is the highest taxed country in the UK. In a certain degree, they are actually right, but it's because we're doing it correctly. So we are actually asking the people with more wealth to pay into the economy for the benefit of everyone, which is, I don't need to tell anybody to reach for a copy of their Marx and Engels. But that is the ethos of socialism, is to have the redistribution of wealth, where it actually benefits every citizen, not just the poor. Because at the end of the day, when that money gets put back into the public purse, it is there fundamentally for the upkeep of services and infrastructure, to keep communities thriving. Again, as I was talking in the last piece, about having liquidity, so that people have the confidence not to think twice about going into the purse and say, well, can I buy that packet of pasta? Have I got enough in order to buy, a better quality of bread rather than, the cheap basics? So, again, and going back to the last piece again, it's a policy choice. And I'm, I think I think me by now, Andrew, the fact that I never look for adulation, but I'm actually quite sitting back like the cat has got the cream that Michelle Thompson's actually qualified, just what I was saying in the last two pieces there, But then, as I say, I think Michelle's a wee bit more on the left side than many of our centre MSPs at the moment.
Possibly so, Chris, possibly so. You mentioned infrastructure there, so let's have a little look at that as well, because the job of keeping the UK's electricity and gas flowing will be returned to public control by 2024 under government plans for the effective renationalisation of a division of the national grid. A new public body, the Future System Operator, will have responsibility for planning and managing energy distribution, with a focus on the challenges posed by decarbonisation. The government said the plan, announced on the eve of the publication of its long-awaited energy strategy, would drive progress towards net zero while maintaining energy security and minimising costs for consumers. The Department for Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy said the National Grid, a stock market listed company since 1995, would be appropriately compensated in a transaction that will see the government retake control of its electricity system operator, the part of the business that keeps the lights on. Gas distribution assets will also be taken into state ownership. The effective nationalisation of the ESO division comes just 3 years after it was formally separated from the rest of National Grid, albeit kept within the same corporate group. The electricity system operator manages supply and demand on the grid to prevent interruption of supply, keeping the lights on. The grid houses the infrastructure assets which support that system. So, Chris, the government has said that whilst we still do not yet have the Westminster Energy Strategy published, and it's now very late, the government is saying that this plan to renationalise part of the national grid will drive progress towards net zero while maintaining energy security and minimising costs for consumers. So am I being overly sceptical and overly cynical when I suggest that if that's what the government says the plan is for, in fact, the plan will do the diametrical opposite?
No, I think you're absolutely 100% correct. I think there's more ramifications to come out of this story than you know what actually meets the eye. You know, I'm going to be harshly critical of my own party here. You know, and ask Nicola directly, where is the energy company that was promised to Scotland in the last manifesto? You know, coming, this actual story itself frightens me because I can see London centralising all control of every sort of like country's energy in order to feed into the actual national grid, and therefore make it really, really difficult for us to actually establish our own energy company. So you know, bearing in mind the fact that Scotland is actually producing the highest amount of renewable energy that is fed into the national grid, I think you know, going on past experience of the Tories nationalising you know, companies, they normally they do that just before they actually put it up for sale in order to make huge profits. You know, so you know, this is a story that you know, we need to keep a real good beady eye on.
Completely, Chris. As ever, not a question of what the government says, but a question of what the government does. And we will keep a very keep a very close eye on this one. Not least because, as I recall it, it was only a couple of weeks ago that part of the gas national grid was privatised and was sold to the Canadian investment managers Macquarie. So we will keep an eye on it. But whilst we've been talking about the grid, it's important in Scotland that we also think about homes that are off grid. So let's have a look at that now. The SNP has warned of a hidden impact amidst the cost of living crisis, warning that millions of homes across the UK could face energy costs higher than those covered by the price cap. Figures from the House of Commons Library have revealed that the off-grid households face an even bigger hike to energy bills, with the SNP warning that around 129,000 off-grid homes in Scotland were being particularly neglected by the Chancellor. The stats showed that while homes protected by the price cap had seen their energy bills rise by 97.5% in the last year, those who fall outside the cap have faced a 164% increase over the same period. In a letter to the Secretary of State for Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy, the SNP's spokesperson, Alan Brown MP, said that with no regulation of off-grid energy sources, households faced a manifestly unjust situation and called for greater support for those hit the hardest by the cost of living crisis. Commenting, Alan Brown MP said, "This revelation brings to light the hidden impact of the Tory cost of living crisis that is disproportionately hitting certain communities and areas of the country. That there are seemingly millions of forgotten families across the UK left with even bigger energy bills than those who've just seen theirs rise by more than 50% is manifestly unjust and strengthens the need for reform across the board, as well as a more significant financial support for these households." So, Chris, this is the second MP who's been majoring on the situation that's affecting off-grid homes, and particularly in rural parts of Scotland. Drew Hendry, the MP for Inverness, raised this in the House about 10 days ago, and now Mr Brown has written to the Secretary of State asking what is going to be done. Now, to be absolutely clear, we're talking here about homes largely in rural areas which are not connected to the gas grid. So they largely use electricity or oil for central heating, and oil is completely uncapped. And so far as I know from talking to people, has well at least more than doubled in price so far this year. So this is on top of many of our rural communities which live in a colder climate with less modern housing, which needs more heating. And it already meant that the average energy bill for rural families in Scotland was already more than £2,000 a year, and that was before energy prices started spiking and the Tory cost of living crisis really started to gather pace. So what can we do for the families in largely rural or northern parts of Scotland to begin to address this even greater challenge? Is the Scottish Government going to have to step in to mitigate this as well as mitigating other effects of the Tory policies and the Tory cost of living crisis?
Well, again, I would urge you not to use the word Tory policies, because at the end of the day, it's policy choices there are policies out there that the Westminster government could actually mitigate, what we are doing. And I'm presuming that the Welsh government are going to be proactive in this as well. But I mean, again, it's a question that you need to ask the electorate as to why a devolved government has to mitigate, on policy choices that are imposed on them that they didn't vote for. And I mean, in relation to Alan Brown, he's talking from, a wealth of experience in his constituency, which has got a high percentage of farms and outlying, sort of like smaller areas that are, heavily reliant on sort of like heavy fuel and propane gas and stuff like that in order to power their houses and stuff like that. So, I mean, he's speaking from a qualified position where he can see it on a day-to-day basis. And people are now starting to ask questions. And again, I go back to the fact that the people who are living in these properties are, you would term, kind of like middle class. I mean, as what the interesting discussion today on the James O'Brien show was, it was asking people to actually define who the metropolitan liberal elite are. And, I would say that, that is the middle class, people who don't really want to rock the boat because they've got quite a nice wee life. But, now their boat is being rocked, and it's not by, people who are advocating independence for Scotland so we can make our own policy choices and hold our own government to account. But it's the fact that it's been made by another government imposing their policy choices on a country that didn't vote for that government, but we're going to have to suck it up anyway. And so I mean, that's why I would possibly say that the overarching theme out of this show this evening is policy choices. That's deliberate policy choices.
Completely, Chris. Completely. There's no question it's a theme here. But let's move to the US now for another story, and that is that the House Select Committee investigating the January 6th insurrection at the US Capitol has now received a cache of emails belonging to Donald Trump's lawyer, John Eastman. Federal court documents filed today have shown. The 101 emails were released to the committee after Judge David Carter ruled in federal court in California last week that Eastman, a hard-right supporter of the former US president, had not made a sufficient claim to attorney-client privilege. The cache of documents sent between the 4th and the 7th of January 2021 contains extensive communications between Eastman and others about plans to obstruct the certification of Joe Biden's victory in the 2020 presidential election. These included proposed efforts to push Trump's former Vice President Mike Pence to reject or delay counting Electoral College votes and weaponizing false allegations of fraud in numerous state lawsuits. In one email, which includes a draft memo for Trump's personal lawyer Rudy Giuliani, recommending that Pence reject some states' electors during the 6th of January congressional meeting, Judge Carter ruled for disclosure as the communications were being used to plan criminal activity. The draft memo published a strategy that knowingly violated the Electoral Count Act, and Dr. Eastman's later memos closely track its analysis and proposal, the judge's ruling says. This memo is both intimately related to and clearly advanced the plan to obstruct the joint session of Congress on January the 6th, 2021. Neither Trump nor Eastman have been charged with crimes relating to the 6th of January, and the order on Eastman's emails was made in civil court. Other references to emails in the judge's ruling allude to other plans Eastman was involved in. Meanwhile, earlier today, the committee chair, Congressman Bernie Thompson, confirmed that Ivanka Trump, the ex-president's daughter, has appeared before the committee, marking the first time a member of the immediate Trump family has appeared. Reports indicated that her testimony lasted about 8 hours. That testimony followed on an appearance before the committee by her husband, Jared Kushner, the previous week. So, Chris, Jared Kushner and Ivanka Trump have now both already given evidence to this committee, and now legal emails are being obtained despite the former president's objections. So do you think, is this an indication that perhaps the net is beginning to tighten on the Trump clan and their supporters?
Well, one would hope so. And, I mean, earlier on I spoke about how slowly the judicial system runs in Europe. I think it's extreme. I would suggest it's kind of like, like a snail's pace in the US. Many things are overly protracted, in order for the lawyers to make, even more obscene amounts of money. I mean, I'm actually surprised that Trump didn't use kind of like runners and stuff like that. You see in the mafia movies, where they don't actually use a phone and stuff like that, and there's no traceable account of conversations. But I mean, maybe Trump just thought that he was untouchable to blasé and to devil may care. It's quite surprising the amount of emails that they've actually got on the man. And one would only hope that this is the beginning of the end of the whole sorry saga. But I think this is actually, again, this is a story. As I think I possibly said a couple of years ago, that we have not heard the last of Trump, and again, I think this will roll on in the background and stuff like that for everyone's amusement and curiosity.
I think you're likely right there, Chris. If nothing else, Mr. Trump appears to like the publicity. But we'll return to Scotland now for our next item, and that is that Public Health Scotland is investigating the cause of a small number of cases of hepatitis, that's liver disease, in young children across the central belt of Scotland. Public Health Scotland are aware of 11 cases of hepatitis requiring admission to hospital that have been identified in children aged between 1 and 5 years old in 4 NHS Health Board areas, and that's Lanarkshire, Tayside, Greater Glasgow, and Clyde and Fife. Most cases have presented from March, and these hepatitis viruses commonly associated with this condition have been excluded. So each year, around 7 or 8 cases of what is called non-A to E hepatitis, that is, hepatitis without other underlying diagnoses, are detected in children in Scotland. The number of cases in such a short period of time, combined with the geographical spread and the severity of the illnesses, in some cases, is unusual and requires further investigation. As yet, there is no clear connection between the cases, and so far there is no clear cause. All potential causes are being explored, but infection is considered to be a more probable source this time. In fact, investigations are still in their early stages, and work is ongoing with partners and other agencies across the UK to investigate these cases. Dr. Nicholas Finn, the Director of Public Health Scotland, said if you have a child who is showing signs of jaundice, where the skin has a yellow tinge and is most easily seen in the whites of the eyes, then parents should contact their GP or another healthcare professional. So, Chris, this is very early days in this outbreak to begin to understand precisely what's going on. However, does this report at least indicate that, or does at least show that Public Health Scotland and its disease monitoring systems are perhaps working?
Well, yeah, and this was, I think it was brought up a couple of months ago. I think Anna Salvar was highlighting the fact that there wasn't enough sort of like background investigations going on to several cases within the Scottish NHS. So I think I would like to think that this is them being proactive, and again, as as sad to hear, I think they have to be thankful that it's a small number of cases. And you know, in the early stages, I think that you know, from that story, they're doing all the investigatory uh, 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 stuff that they need to do in order to try and sort of like establish some sort of you know, cause or link or pathway that you know could be behind it all. I mean, it's a horrible thing that we're actually talking about. That you know, that children in this day and age are actually suffering this, and you know, I mean, I don't know an awful lot about hepatitis, but you know, I would like to, I would hope to think that it's not linked to, you know, the ongoing. No,
Right,
you know,
so
I mean, the actual sort of like life chances and you know, the high rates of poverty at this moment in time, people making choices. You know, you can no longer. I mean, personally, I have made a conscious decision to stop going to Holland and Barrett and spending my money on vitamin C tablets and stuff like that, because I can't afford it. I really, honestly can't afford it. You know, I mean,
yeah.
there was a time back in the 70s, I think you'll remember this, Andrew, if you like to indulge me, where parents used to, you know, like force feed their children Halib orange. You know what I mean? Because they thought it was, you know, that'll stave off anything. You know what I mean? So
Well,
you know, I hope people don't sort of like take a knee jerk reaction to this. You know, that's the point I was trying to make.
of course, Chris. No, I get that. We're talking here about what's called non-A to E hepatitis. So it's liver disease that is not caused by the hepatitis infections A to E that we often hear about and we often have vaccinations against as well. So it's a different situation here, but we will continue to follow this story closely because, as you say, it's serious for the children who are affected and for their families. But our final item this evening is that a vigil is to be held in Edinburgh's George Square for the public to show solidarity with all those affected by the war in Ukraine. Organised by the University of Edinburgh's chaplaincy, the peaceful outdoor gathering will take place on Thursday, the 7th of April at 5 p.m. Prayers and messages of hope will be shared, and it will be led by the Reverend Dr. Harriet Harris. The event marks the beginning of the chaplaincy's Light Up Our Hearts for Ukraine campaign, when people will be encouraged to show solidarity in any way that they can. This includes sowing sunflower seeds, lighting a candle in their window, or attending further events. Those wanting to show support online are invited to share a colourful image designed by fourth-year English literature student Marta Christiansen. And information about the Light Up Our Hearts for Ukraine campaign can be found at www.guerrillapeaceukraine.org. Within the first evening of the campaign website going live, 66 sunflowers were marked on the interactive map to show events taking place all around the world. And this is the second initiative of this kind to be organised by the university's chaplaincy. In 2016, events were organised to encourage communities to come together for those affected by the war in Syria. So that was our final item this evening. In making these programmes, Broadcasting Scotland relies on the support of viewers and others who value our approach to news, current affairs and culture. If you would like to support us, then please consider subscribing or donating to Broadcasting Scotland, and you will find the link to do that on the screen now. You will have seen from our tweets and our social media that we do really need all the financial assistance that we can get in order to continue doing what we do. There are other ways in which you can also contribute to our work. If you'd like to volunteer to work with Broadcasting Scotland, then please visit our website at www.broadcastingscotland.scot and send us a message there. Meantime, I'll be here again tomorrow evening with the next edition of Scotland at 7, so please tune in and join us then. And that's the way it is at very nearly Scotland at 8. I would like to say thank you to everyone who's been watching this evening, and especially to our very special guest, Chris McCusker. Thanks, Chris.
Yeah, no, thanks, Andrew. I've thoroughly enjoyed those topics. Normally on a Monday night, so it's a pleasant change to be on a Thursday.
It's been a wee change, and you've helped us with the culture in particular.
On a Wednesday,
We've been covering Tom Hanks movies, Marx and Engel, and John Steinbeck this evening. So thank you.
well,
Now, thanks, Chris. Before we close, today is the anniversary, of course, of the signing of the Declaration of Arbroath. So this evening, we will play out with an appropriate video, which we hope that you enjoy. Bye-bye.
To the Most Holy Father and Lord in Christ, the Lord John, by divine providence, Supreme Pontiff of the Holy Roman and Universal Church, his humble and devout sons, Duncan, Earl of Fife, Thomas Randolph, Earl of Murray, Lord of Man and Annandale, Patrick Dunbar, Earl of March, Malise, Earl of Strathearn, Malcolm, Earl of Lennox, William, Earl of Ross, Magnus, Earl of Caithness and Orkney, and William, Earl of Sutherland. Walter, Steward of Scotland, William Soulis, Butler of Scotland, James, Lord of Douglas, Roger Mowbray, David, Lord of Brechin, David Graham, Ingram Umfraville, John Menteith, Guardian of the Earldom of Menteith, Alexander Fraser, Gilbert Hay, Constable of Scotland, Robert Keith, Marshal of Scotland, Henry Sinclair, John Graham, David Lindsay, William Oliphant, Patrick Graham, John Fenton, William Abernathy, David Wemyss, William Mushet, Fergus of Ardrossan, Eustace Maxwell, William Ramsay, William Mowat, Alan Murray, Donald Campbell, John Cameron, Reginald Chen, Alexander Seaton, Andrew Leslie and Alexander Straighton, and the other barons and freeholders and the whole community of the realm of Scotland send all manner of filial reverence with devout kisses of his blessed feet. Most Holy Father, we know, and from the chronicles and books of the ancients we find that, among other famous nations, our own, the Scots, has been graced with widespread renown. It journeyed from Greater Scythia by way of the Tyrrhenian Sea, and the Pillars of Hercules, and dwelt for a long course in time in Spain among the most savage peoples. But nowhere could it be subdued by people, however barbarous. Thence it came 1200 years after the people of Israel crossed the Red Sea, to its home in the west, where it still lives today. The Britons it first drove out, the Picts it utterly destroyed, and even though very often assailed by the Norwegians, the Danes and the English, it took possession of that home with many victories and untold efforts. And as the histories of old time bear witness, they have held it free of all servitude ever since. In their kingdom there have reigned 113 kings of their own royal stock, the line unbroken by a single foreigner. The high qualities and merits of these people, were they not otherwise manifest, shine forth clearly enough from this, that the King of Kings and Lord of Lords, our Lord Jesus Christ, after his passion and resurrection, called them, even though settled in the uttermost parts of the earth, almost the first to his most holy faith. Nor did he wish them to be confirmed in that faith by merely anyone, but by the first of his apostles, by calling, though second or third in rank, the most gentle Saint Andrew, the blessed Peter's brother, and desired him to keep them under his protection as their patron forever. The most holy fathers, your predecessors, gave careful heed to these things, and strengthened the same kingdom and people with many favours and numerous privileges, as being the special charge of the blessed Peter's brother. Thus our people, under their protection, did indeed live in freedom and peace, up to the time when that mighty prince, the King of the English, Edward, the father of the one who reigns today, when our kingdom had no head, and our people harboured no malice or treachery, and were then unused to wars or invasions, came in a guise of a friend and ally to harass them as an enemy. The deeds of cruelty, massacre, violence, pillage, arson, imprisoning prelates, burning down monasteries, robbing and killing monks and nuns, and yet other outrages without number, which he committed against our people, sparing neither age nor sex, religion nor rank. No one could describe nor fully imagine, unless he had seen them with his own eyes. But from these countless evils, we have been set free by the help of him who, though he afflicts, yet heals and restores, by our most tireless Prince, King and Lord, the Lord Robert. He, that his people and his heritage might be delivered out of the hands of our enemies, bore cheerfully toil and fatigue, hunger and peril, like another Maccabeus or Joshua. Him too, divine providence, the succession to his right, according to our laws and customs, which we shall maintain to the death, and to the due consent and assent of us all have made our Prince and King. To him, as to the man by whom salvation has been wrought unto our people, we are bound both by his right and by his merits, that our freedom may be still maintained, and by him, come what may, we mean to stand. Yet, if he should give up what he has begun, seeking to make us or our kingdom subject to the King of England or the English, we should exert ourselves at once to drive him out as our enemy and a subverter of his own right and ours, and make some other man who is well able to defend us our king. For as long as 100 of us remain alive, never will we on any conditions be subjected to the lordship of the English. It is in truth not for glory, nor riches, nor honours that we are fighting, but for freedom alone, which no honest man gives up but with life itself. Therefore it is, Reverend Father and Lord, that we beseech your holiness with our most earnest prayers and suppliant hearts, inasmuch as you will in your sincerity and goodness consider all this, that since with him whose vicegerent on earth you are, there is neither weighing nor distinction of Jew and Greek, Scotsman or Englishman, you will look with the eyes of a father on the troubles and privations brought by the English upon us and upon the Church of God. May it please you to admonish and exhort the King of the English, who ought to be satisfied with what belongs to him, since England used once to be enough for 7 kings or more, to leave us Scots in peace, who live in this poor little Scotland, beyond which there is no dwelling place at all, and covet nothing but our own. We are sincerely willing to do anything for him, having regard to our condition, that we can, to win peace for ourselves. This truly concerns you, Holy Father, since you see the savagery of the heathen raging against the Christians, as the sins of the Christians have indeed deserved, and the frontiers of Christendom being pressed inward every day, and how much it will tarnish your Holiness's memory if, which God forbid, the Church suffers eclipse or scandal in any branch of it during your time, you must perceive. Then rouse the Christian princes who for false reasons pretend that they cannot go to the help of the Holy Land because of wars they have in hand with their neighbours. The real reason that prevents them is that in making war on their smaller neighbours, they find a readier advantage and weaker resistance. But how cheerfully our Lord the King and we too would go there if the King of the English would leave us in peace. He from whom nothing is hidden well knows, and we profess and declare it to you as the Vicar of Christ and to all Christendom. But if your Holiness puts too much faith in the tales the English tell, and will not give sincere belief to all this, nor refrain from favouring them to our undoing, then the slaughter of bodies, the perdition of souls, and all the other misfortunes that will follow, inflicted by them on us, and by us on them, will, we believe, be surely laid by the Most High to your charge. To conclude, we are and shall ever be, as far as duty calls us, ready to do your will in all things, as obedient sons to you as his vicar, and to him as the supreme king and judge, we commit the maintenance of our cause, casting our cares upon him, and firmly trusting that he will inspire us with courage and bring our enemies to nothing. May the Most High preserve you to his holy church in holiness and health for many days to come. Given at the monastery of Arbroath in Scotland on the 6th day of the month of April, in the year of grace 1320, and the 15th year of the reign of our King aforesaid.